If the Shroud of Turin is just some medieval forgery, then there shouldn't be a 10th century coin with the same face on it, should there? But it seems like there is. Don't go away, I'll be right back. Well, hey there, Gracious Gang. It's Mike from thegraciousguest.org, back with you again for another episode of The Gracious Guest Show, which I couldn't do if you weren't here. Well, I could do it, but it would be pretty boring and useless. It would just be me. So to make sure that this content gets out as far and wide as possible and really gets that YouTube algorithm going, however that works, please subscribe to this channel right away. Go ahead and hit that little thumbs up down there real quick. It doesn't take any time at all, and it helps get the show out there, helps get this episode out there. Also, make sure that you share this as far and wide as you can. If you're listening on the podcast, if you didn't know we had a podcast, that's actually how this show began. You can check out over on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that podcasts are found. That's a great way to listen to the show on the go. So for those of you who are listening on the podcast, I do want to encourage you, though, to also subscribe to the YouTube channel because on occasion, like this episode, for example, we have some graphics for you to be able to see, and it really helps kind of give you a fuller experience of this interview if you do that. So feel free to listen either way or both ways, whatever suits you. So thank you for stopping by today. Obviously, the Shroud of Turin continues to be a very intriguing topic for a lot of you. A lot of people have actually found this channel because of various interviews that I never really set out to do related to the Shroud. This just kind of happened, and I think it's providential because it's led to some very interesting conversations, very spiritually enriching, as I said, thought-provoking sort of things to take into account, to look at the evidence. And with me today to do that again is Justin Robinson, another new Shroud acquaintance. And this is Justin's description, his little bio paragraph from his blog, which you can find below. I've shared all the information that we're going to go through down in the show notes as always, so definitely check those resources out down there. This is from Justin's blog, which is the Coins and History Foundation, coinsandhistoryfoundation.org. Justin Robinson is a historian and author working within the coin industry, a fellow of the Royal Numismatics Society, and a member of the British Numismatic Society. Justin is also a regular contributor to Coin News, which is the UK's biggest selling coin magazine. He loves working in the numismatics industry where he gets to share his passion for history to tell the stories that bring the past to life. And this is a quote from Justin here. He says, "A coin without a story is just a piece of metal, but a coin with a story becomes history in your hands." And so Justin's interest, as he'll talk a little bit about here, in history, in coins, especially rare coins from all kinds of different historical backgrounds, connected with his childhood interest in the Shroud of Turin in a very intriguing way just a few years ago. And that we're going to reference this quite a bit, actually. His article that he wrote up about this topic of potential coins bearing the face not just of Jesus, sort of artistically imagined, but specifically the face from the Shroud of Turin, and what that would mean if it's true, was in this edition of the Shroud newsletter from our friends at the British Society for the Turin Shroud, who actually got me in touch with Justin. So kudos to all of you over there, especially Brenda and Pam. So I want to jump right into this interview with Justin Robinson, really digging into this intriguing question, and we touched on a couple other things along the way. I know you're going to love it, so stay tuned. Here is my interview with Justin Robinson on coins and the face of the Shroud of Turin. Check it out. All right, we have Justin Robinson here with us tonight, or today. It's tonight for you, today for me. Thank you so much for being my gracious guest here today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's good to be here.
I think it's funny. I don't want to mess this up, but I believe you're my third guest now from the United Kingdom to come on the channel. So I said, think it's a real international affair here now, which is
the
great.
British are coming. Absolutely,
that's right. This might be concerning. No, I'm just kidding. So this is a really well, I think all of these Shroud discussions have been so enlightening, so interesting, so thought provoking, and they always make me go dig deeper. They always seem to generate more guest ideas, you know. But so I don't want to shortchange anyone who's been on before, but I was particularly excited about this conversation just because I think it's something that is maybe a little bit more unique than some. I mean, we've covered lots of different aspects of the Shroud with different guests, and they all have, of course, their own
Mm.
unique experience or even expertise in some cases with the topic or coming at it from a different angle. But this was particularly interesting to me about this more like the artistic and kind of historical clues to be sort of explored here, and that's really what I'm excited to get into. So I just want to kick off by asking you if you just want to share with our viewers and listeners on the podcast a little bit about yourself, your background, how you kind of got interested in the Shroud to begin with.
Yeah, sure. Well, my interest in the shroud began really when I was a small boy, and I can remember at aged about 10, seeing a book my mother was reading, and it was very interesting because it had this strange black and white photograph of a bearded man on the actual cover of the book. And I can remember asking my mother basically about the photograph, and she explained, then obviously started to talk to me about the Shroud of Turin. And the book was actually Ian Wilson's book, his first book on the Shroud of Turin,
Mhm.
which was absolutely groundbreaking and was a huge sort of international bestseller. And I became hooked very, very quickly. And I can remember watching The Silent Witness, which is that excellent documentary that
Sure.
David Rolfe made. And yeah, I absolutely became absolutely hooked, and began to read. I think the book, Ian Wilson's book, I think became the first grown-up book that I actually read, and I devoured it. I thought it was the most incredible story,
Yeah.
and that sparked my interest. And of course, my own, obviously, after I studied history at university, I lectured in history for a little while. I then went off and did completely different things, sort of in career wise,
Hmm.
until relatively recently, about 10 years ago, I had an opportunity to get involved in the coin industry, and I now work as a historian within the coin industry, which is great because coins are amazing.
Sure.
They're little coin capsules, and you can hold them in your hand, and they're tangible.
Right.
And the great thing about coins is we often know when they were struck and who struck them and where they were struck. So they give us a lot of grounding in history, which
Sure.
is fantastic. And every coin has its own unique story to tell. And so my job, I get the fun of actually exploring those stories and writing about them, sort of for coin buyers and people like that within the industry. So that's sort of where I sort of came in, and suddenly I found a tremendous crossover between my interest in the shroud and the coins of the Byzantine Empire.
Sure.
And what is very interesting, particularly, is that obviously the face of Christ was depicted on coins throughout the Byzantine Empire. The ones that I became most interested in because I could afford them would be the bronze anonymous follis, as they were called, and these were the sort of the mass-produced circulating coins that circulated throughout the Byzantine Empire, struck in Constantinople. Beginning in 969 AD, Emperor John Zemeckis basically decided that rather than putting his own image on the coin, that he would actually put the face of Christ. And I became fascinated by that because we know that within Constantinople at that time, there was this mysterious cloth, not made by human hands, called the mandilion of Edessa,
Right.
the Edessa cloth. And this is the cloth that Ian Wilson believes, and David Rolfe, and a great many Shroud students believe, of course, is the what we now know today as the Shroud of Turin.
Right.
And because of its descriptions by the people that actually saw it, chime completely with what we see of the cloth today. And
Sure.
so my interest there was that what prompted the Emperor Zimisces to actually put the face of Christ on his coin? Could it be perhaps that they wanted to promote the fact that the Mandilion was now in their care. It was now in Constantinople. It was only within about 20 years, you see, of the Mandylion actually arriving in Constantinople that it first appeared on this mass-produced circulating coin, and that obviously immediately fascinated me, and I began
Sure.
looking for examples of a bronze follis, so I could test my theory that perhaps the coin engravers might have been looking at the image on the Mandylion and copying it.
Did
And
you?
and one,
Can I just
I'm
ask a
sorry,
quick question?
of
No, yeah.
course.
So the did you find, just to clarify, did you find basically historical records indicating that he had started doing that right in that time frame, and then you were kind of looking for the coins themselves, or did you find the coin first? I was
No, no, the coins
clarifying.
are well, they because they are they're not particularly rare because
Okay,
these were
gotcha.
mass produced. They were circulated throughout the Byzantine Empire,
Right.
and they actually carried on making the anonymous follises as they called them
Hmm.
for about 110 years. So
Okay.
they're not particularly rare. What is quite hard to find is because these would have been circulating in people's hands. They would have been
Hmm.
changing hands regularly. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of the detail tends to be lost on them.
Sure.
If you can imagine the raised area of the
Right.
detail
Well,
on the
the
coin
face, I would
is the
largely
first that
imagine.
gets rubbed off, and of course that's going to
Right.
be the face. So
Right.
very often you can find these anonymous follises for sale, and the face of Christ is completely oval and smooth, and that's simply because it's been rubbed off over decades of use.
Sure.
So the challenge is always finding one that has a good level of detail. And
Hmm.
I found one which was one of the earliest coins. It was actually one of the coins that was struck during the reign of the Emperor Zimisces in 969 AD. And
Okay.
this particular coin struck me immediately because obviously I'm interested in the shroud. That there are some incredible, I think, similar features which are similar between the face of the Shroud of Turin and the face on this particular coin that we know was struck in 969 AD. And I found that particularly fascinating. The lovely thing about that is that we can very simply put the coin up on the screen,
Hmm.
and anybody watching this will be able to form their own conclusion very
Right.
quickly, which I think is quite a nice thing to do.
And if you're
The
just listening
actual
to the podcast, it's more incentive
Yes.
to keep doing that, but also come and check out the video too.
Oh, absolutely, and you can see the
Yep.
coin. I mean, the
Yep.
example, the coin is there, and you'll be able to find it on, as I said, on your website, but also,
Hmm.
it's on the Coins and History Foundation blog, which I write for. I've written an article on that, and all the coins are there. So if you type in Byzantine coins, Shroud of Turin,
Right.
you'll probably find them quite
And we'll have all
quickly.
those links too in the show
Sure,
notes. So
sure,
sure.
sure.
Yep.
But I think, and I think this is where it got really interesting and exciting for me, because when you started to sort of compare the similarities, I think what our coin engraver did was very unusual and very distinctive. Um, and again, it's just going back to trying to understand why he did what he did. I believe that as the coin engravers would have been obviously given this brief by the emperor to depict Christ, it would make perfect sense to me, although the image of Edessa was not on public display at the time. I think it would make sense for the emperor to actually allow the coin engravers, particularly at first, to actually go in and actually see this image for
Mm,
themselves, so that they could make the most accurate likeness they could.
sure.
And that seems to be what they've done. So for example, on my little coin, and here it is. This is the actual coin. You're not going to be able to see it. I'm holding it up to you to the screen, or trying to. You're not going
Oh,
to see it,
okay.
but you'll see a better
Whoop.
example of it. Obviously, you'll see the proper picture.
Sure.
But but what you actually see is this distinctive cross incorporating the eyebrows, the forehead, and the nose. There's evidence of a small square underneath the moustache. There's evidence of injury to the cheek.
Mm,
There's a forked beard, and there's two strands of hair running in parallel on the left-hand side. And all of these details, and bearing in mind you're looking at a at a face image which is little more than a centimeter in diameter. I mean, that's
Right.
how much you're working with. To incorporate all of that detail into such a small area, and to make it match up so closely to the face that appears on the Shroud of Turin is, I think, quite compelling. Now, again, other people may have their own opinion, but I mean that's certainly mine. And I think that what I particularly liked about that is that it seems to resonate with what I think was happening at that time. And I believe that the reason why the emperor wanted this particular coin to go out is because he wanted to basically show off the fact that the image of Edessa, this holy shroud, this holy image, was now in their possession, and that certainly seems to be what we're seeing. The other thing is that there's also a very nice inscription
Mm,
actually on the coin itself, which actually says "God with us."
mm,
Which is it's another nice example to show that that I think is what we're looking at.
mm,
And As I said, so that was the first coin. A little while later, I found another coin which also has some extraordinary similarities. It was struck a little while later, in 1028. But it also depicts Christ. And that is also fascinating as well, because as well as all of the other details, there's a couple of, again, details which only appear on the shroud. And if you weren't actually copying the image from the shroud, why would you include it?
right.
There is, for example, a horizontal band across the throat, exactly where we
Mm.
actually see one actually appear on the shroud. There's an
Is that like the
inverted.
one they show in some of the
Sorry.
what's it called, the sort of forensic breakdown, where they show how it appears that the beard, which was longer, has that wrapping around the outside of the shroud, or
Yes,
the
that's right.
postulating
That's
that, right? And then you see the mark in the beard of like that,
correct.
linen.
Correct.
Okay, sure, but you're saying
Yeah,
you
so
see
so that
that
we
depicted
think
on the
it was
coin.
that's right. We think it was a chin strap or
Right.
something that was holding the face up, or stopping the
Sure.
chin from flopping down in death. But it's there. It's actually on the shroud, and it's been included, on this
Hmm.
coin design as well. And incredibly enough, in the forehead, there's also a strange shape in the middle of the forehead, which corresponds with a blood stain, which you
Hmm.
actually see on the Shroud of Turin as well. Again, I mean, these sort of details are you would not expect to just for them to have occurred randomly. I think
Sure.
there's something going on here. The difficulty that we have with the Byzantine phallus, as I said, is that it's always very difficult to try to find one that actually has a good level of detail. But certainly there does seem to be evidence that some of the coin engravers certainly were copying the image of Edessa as accurately as they possibly could. And I find
Right.
that quite interesting, because obviously, if it's more confirmation that the Shroud of Turin was the Mandylion, or was the Edessa cloth, and bearing in mind that both of these coins were actually struck at least 200 to 300 years before the disputed radiocarbon
Hmm.
testing dates for the shroud claims that the shroud was dated from that period. So again, these help to sort of demonstrate that something's going on. That
Right.
within that 300 years before the carbon 14 date, which we now know obviously was has been extensively disputed. I believe that there were sort of medieval, Byzantine artists
Hmm.
actually copying the image that they could see on the Shroud of Turin. And so for
Right.
that reason, I mean, it becomes a sort of a fascinating field of study, and it's something which is absolutely fascinating and is now taking up quite a lot of my time because I'm really enjoying it. But it's no, it's so it's it, that in a nutshell is sort of where I'm
Yes.
coming from.
Well, and it seems so. It seems like there might be a parallel here, so to speak, with so you have the Shroud of Turin, which again, for anyone that's new to the channel or new to this kind of information, it's we have a unbroken chain of custody on this cloth that's currently in Turin, and in Italy, Torino, what have you,
Mhm,
back
mhm,
to I don't have the date in front of me, but the 16th century where it's at now, correct? But before that, we go back to various places in France. You know, we have a record of it back into the 14th century, which is when the
Absolutely.
right, like that's undisputed. And then you have these claims that, of course, that's exactly when it was fabricated, supposedly that it's
Yeah,
supposedly a medieval
I mean
hoax.
the first absolutely cast iron sort of evidence that we have is 1349,
Right.
where we have a man called Geoffrey de Charnay,
Hmm.
who requests permission from the Pope to display the burial shroud of Christ in his hometown of Liry in
Right.
northern France, and the family don't reveal how the shroud came into their possession.
Right.
But the research which has been done would suggest that it's very interesting because the story of the Knights Templar, who there is evidence to suggest that they actually took custody of this incredible sort of artifact and basically kept it safe,
Hmm.
sort of taking it from place to place. But when the Knights Templar were actually rounded up and arrested in 1307, Friday the 13th, in a
Right.
dawn raid on Friday the 13th of October. What is interesting is that the the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, a man called Jacques de Molay, was arrested with 60 Templar knights, and they were charged with heresy. And their lengthy charge sheet included an accusation that they worshipped the image of a bearded man.
Hmm.
And in 1314, after refusing to divulge the whereabouts of the treasures that they guarded, Molay and his deputy, who was known as the Templar Draper, were burnt at the stake
Hmm.
in Paris. And now the name of the Templar Draper was Geoffrey de Charnay. So it's the
Hmm.
same name as the man who, 50 years later, is claiming to have the shroud in his possession. So suddenly you have this. This is obviously something with the Descharnay family,
Right.
and there's a tangible connection with the
Hmm.
Templars. And the suggestion, of course, is that it ended up being looked after by the Descharnay family.
Right.
Now that's kind of significant because we know that the mandilion, the Edessa cloth, disappears from Constantinople in 1204 because
Right.
obviously it's sacked by the Crusaders,
Right.
and we're told that that the treasures are looted, and obviously they take anything of value, and that's where the story of the mandilion comes to an end.
And
It
there's no
isn't really.
record, as far as I know, that correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no record or claim of the Mandelian being destroyed. It's just we lose a
No, no, no,
we it's
no,
just
no. There
missing.
are.
Right.
Yeah, no, and there are some sort of interesting sort of pieces of evidence that we have. There's a letter to Pope Innocent III in 1205, which states that the linen in which our Lord was wrapped after his death has now been taken away. It's now
Mm.
being looked after. It's now under the protection of the
Mm.
Crusader Knights in Athens. So we
Hmm.
do get these sort of interesting sort of connections
Right.
that would suggest that the Knights Templar basically looked after it, and it became
Sure.
their most treasured possession. And that, incidentally, throws me off on a fascinating and very interesting tangent
Please, yeah.
because because the one thing, and again, this is nothing particularly to do with the coins, but it is interesting, of course, the legend of the Knights Templar, what they're most closely associated with, of course, is the story of the Holy Grail.
Right.
And the Holy Grail, of course, is described as being a vessel that Joseph of Arimathea used to catch the blood of Jesus during the crucifixion, and so obviously this Holy Grail then becomes the most, and of course Dan Brown wrote a movie,
Right.
and there's the books, many books have been written about it.
Yeah.
Now, what is interesting, of course, is that a vessel doesn't have to be a cup. It's
Hmm.
often the Holy Grail is often depicted as a cup in Indiana Jones movies and things
Yes.
like that. But of course, a vessel is something that carries something else. In this case, the blood of Jesus.
Yeah.
And when we
The
actually
the
look at the
Ark of
old,
Noah is described as a vessel.
absolutely right. When we then look at Joseph Arimathea's actions during the crucifixion, we discover that it's Joseph Arimathea that goes out and purchases a linen, a strip of linen, goes to Pilate, requests permission to take Jesus's body down off the cross after his death, wraps the body in the linen, and transports it to his tomb. So a vessel that contains the blood of Jesus, guarded by the Knights Templar. I think there's
Wow.
a very interesting connection, especially when you introduce the Joseph Arimathea element, and we know that it's Joseph Arimathea who purchases the linen strip
Right.
and wraps Jesus's bloody body in it. Suddenly, I think that we're looking at the origin story, the real origin story of the Holy Grail, and I believe that the Shroud of Turin, the Mandylion of Edessa, and the Holy Grail are all one and the same thing.
That's the first I've heard that. I got,
Hmm.
chills when you start. That's I'm gonna have to look into that. That's we could do a whole other show just on that. But
Oh,
what's
sure,
interesting
sure.
to me here is I think there is, a parallel seems to me here between, again, like we talked about this with Dr. Cheryl White. Like we're careful to use the word proof, but the word evidence, and I've had, sometimes I brought this up before. We get a lot of good thought-provoking comments from a lot of our viewers, and please do share
Hmm.
those, of course. But sometimes there seems to be, I think, and just maybe this is in common parlance, this confusion between what constitutes evidence. And I see sometimes, like, if it's not something that the person criticizing personally accepts as proof, they say it's not evidence or there's no evidence.
Sure,
But I
sure.
think it's important to distinguish. Like, for example, I think it's fair to say that, strictly speaking, when you look at something like the Sudarium in Oviedo and the
Hmm.
incredible forensic work that has been done, showing, for me personally, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the unquestionable matches between the head wounds on the Sudarium of Oviedo and the Shroud of Turin,
Absolutely,
that
absolutely.
the argument basically is, well, this is very strong evidence to basically indicate that these two cloths must have been on the same body at some point, and we know where the Sidarium has been this whole
Yes,
time, back to at least the 5th century, so it doesn't, we
yes.
expressly speaking, prove that it goes back to Christ. But it definitely, of course, is strong evidence to suggest that the claim that the Shroud of Turin is supposedly something that's just, mocked up, several centuries later. I see a similarity with this because we're basically saying here that if indeed you have coin strikers for, these imperial professional guys, right, that are creating these coins that have this many pretty clear matches to the face on the Shroud of
Yes.
Turin, that is additional evidence to suggest that they must have seen this cloth, and it must thus be older than 14th century.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think when you factor in, I mean, there is a lot of evidence. And I think that's one of the things that excites me so much about the Shroud
Hmm.
is that the Shroud of Turin, I've always described it as being a place where science, history, and faith collide.
Hmm.
You can approach the Shroud of Turin from a purely academic, historical perspective. You can approach it from a purely academic, scientific perspective, or you can approach it from a purely theological perspective, and eventually you'll all find common ground and you'll all meet somewhere in the middle. And I think that there are very few objects which can do that.
Hmm.
The shroud is often described as being, I think, the most scientifically studied object on Earth. It probably is. I can't think of anything that has been studied more. And one of the fascinating things for me is that every investigation into the shroud has thrown up more questions and has
Right.
given us tantalizing more sort of evidence, as you say, sort of hard evidence to show it. So, the pollen that was that was extracted from
Sure.
from the cloth, shows where the shroud has been in its history, and it
Right.
shows that it was in Edessa, it was in Jerusalem, it then has been carried to France, to Constantinople, sorry, first, and then to France,
Right.
and then down on its journey down to Turin. So we can see where the shroud has been. We also have these tantalizing pieces of evidence that show that the shroud has to be older than the carbon-14 testing would tell us. As you say, the coin evidence is one thing. The Hungarian Prey manuscript, that's another.
Right.
We have these incredible illustrations, these incredible paintings, Byzantine art. Going all the way back, and again, this all helps to sort of pinpoint and show that this was something that was known in the ancient world. This was
Mm.
something that people copied and saw, and that image was disseminated. And this is not something that could have been faked up by a late
Right.
medieval forger. The
Right.
very fact that we are still incapable of reproducing the image, even with 21st century technology, I think also has to factor into this. I
And a
mean,
serious
you
million
tend to,
dollar offer from David Roth
well,
for him to
exactly
do
that,
it.
and
I
I
love
think
that.
which the British Museum have sort of like, yeah, we're going to pretend that hasn't happened. It's. I mean, the British Museum are really trying to defend the indefensible, and are not doing a very good job of it. I think I can remember when the carbon-14 test happened, and
Hmm.
I was absolutely crushed. And my mother, I remember, was very, very upset
Sure.
because
Yeah.
this was something to see the word fake sort of in every newspaper in the country.
Yeah.
And I can remember at the time at the press conference, Sir Edward Hall, when somebody asked him exactly what how the shroud was created. And he said, "Oh, well," he said, "there was a big market for forgeries and for fake relics at that time. Somebody went out, got a bit of linen, faked it up, and flogged it." And they were his exact words.
Yep.
And I remember thinking at the time, well, you obviously have no intellectual scientific curiosity to be able to make that statement,
Hmm.
because has the image not captivated you in any stretch of the imagination? Are you not even remotely interested to try to
Yeah.
understand how that image has been formed? Because it's not a painting, it's not
Yeah.
a rubbing, it's not sort of sweat and herbs or anything like that.
Right.
This is an absolutely three-dimensional sort of properties. This
Right.
is a complete a photographic negative. You actually see more of it as a photographic negative. This is something that was not being faked up and flogged
Right.
in the Middle Ages in quite the way that Sir Edward Hall said. So I think that even without wanting to get into all of the details of why the carbon-14 test is flawed, I think it demonstrated a
Sure.
huge disinterest in the
Hmm.
cloth, and I think that anybody, and my challenge to anybody, uh, regardless of faith or anything like that, is if you have even the slightest scientific curiosity about get into the shroud,
Sure.
find out, and do your own research and
Right.
find out what what the image how the image has been formed. Get into it, and lots of people have hypothesized suggestions. All of them fall far short. I think what
Right.
what we're seeing is something that is absolutely unique,
Well,
and
and
I find that fascinating.
at the risk of a shameless channel self channel promotion, if we have a whole episode just on the carbon 14 dating with Joe Marino. So if
Brilliant,
anyone hasn't
brilliant.
seen that, go check that out.
Yeah,
But
absolutely,
well, let me ask
absolutely.
you a little bit more here about, because this is, I'm curious about just some more questions I had about the kind of, maybe, I don't know, the how to, if that's a little clunky of a way of putting it, but
Hmm.
with how they went about creating these coins. Because this, and by the way, I'm holding it up for anyone watching. The reason I first found out about all this is because my lovely little copy of the Shroud
Oh
newsletter
yes,
from
that's good.
our friends at the British Society for the Turin Shroud,
Yes,
who are always so generous on, to share these episodes, and many of whom have been on here. You had this article, I think, was this 2018, I think, this
yes,
particular,
that's right.
or
That's right.
2018,
Yes.
2019. And so that's where I first was seeing about the coins. I had seen some of the things you mentioned that I want to pursue more in the future here with, again, some of the
Yeah.
art history, different prints, different tapestries, things that depict aspects of the crucifixion. They're passion of Christ related artwork that depicts, again, like not so much like a picture of the Shroud of Turin, but for anyone who hasn't really followed this, we're talking about images, Easter images, passion images that we see of the Paschal mystery of Jesus's crucifixion, his burial, all these things that if you look closely, you'll see details in the art that if you're curious, you'll say, well, why would you show it that way? If you didn't have some knowledge of the shroud, which is so specific.
Yeah.
So that broader subject interests me a lot. And now I'm looking here at, you backed up a little in the article. I know when you were talking about sort of this journey of emperors beginning, like you said before, to depict Christ on these
Hmm.
on coins. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about, before, because this goes back, I think, if I read this correctly, a little earlier, where there may have been this time period, if I understand it correctly, of some of the Byzantine emperors sending their coin experts, or the mint representatives of the mint
Yeah,
down
I
to
think.
Edessa, perhaps,
Well,
even
well,
when it
well.
was
The
still there.
first, yeah, I mean, the first emperor to actually depict Christ on his coin was actually in 692, and it was the Emperor
Right.
Justinian II.
Sure.
And of course, at that time, the Mandylion was in Edessa.
Hmm.
And so, yes, so it seems that he may have dispatched an engraver to go down and take a look at it. I mean, certainly when the Mandylion was rediscovered in Edessa, because it was actually hidden. I mean, I don't know the story in terms of the
Right.
legend, but the legend has it, of course, is that Jesus's disciples bought this mysterious cloth bearing this image of Christ, not made by human hands, and it was actually entrusted into the safekeeping of King Akbar of
Mm.
Edessa.
Hmm.
When King Akbar was one of the first rulers to actually convert to Christianity, so they
Right.
obviously felt it was better to entrust it into his safekeeping. But when Akbar died, the city quickly reverted back to paganism, and the image was hidden. Was actually was hidden and lost, and so for centuries nobody knew where it was, and the whole thing sort of slipped into legend. And then it was around about the 6th century. I think it was during repairs to the city wall after a flood in around 525 AD
Mm.
that the cloth was unexpectedly discovered. It was actually hidden in a niche
Hmm.
high above in the city wall, and one observer described the image as being a moist secretion with no paint or artistic craft transferred onto the cloth.
Mm.
Which is very sort of, I think, telling of the image that we actually see
Right.
on the show.
Well, and
Now,
keep in
what's
mind, obviously,
interesting
like, no one at that point has ever seen a photograph, and I think we take that for granted. Like,
precisely, yeah.
how would you describe a photograph on linen if you've never
Well,
seen a photograph before? I
that's
mean, yeah.
that's right. No, and I think they could see immediately that it wasn't paint. It
Right.
hadn't been painted by an artist. This was something that had just occurred
Sure.
to stain the linen in that particular way to create this incredible image. Now, so this is where obviously the Mandylion, the name means not made by human hands,
Oh,
and of
okay.
course we get paintings then sort of our image of Christ that is carried on down to the present day, being the long hair and the beard and the
Hmm.
moustache. This is the image, obviously, that is cemented, shall we say, from the 6th century onwards, and we see this image appearing all over the Christian world. So yeah, as I say, Justinian II then sends his somebody down to obviously copy the image, because the image of a bearded man then Christ then appears on uh, on um, on the gold coins of Justinian
Mm.
II. Um, so I think that was the first time. Then of course, you have a period of where suddenly they were tormenting themselves as to whether or not they should depict Christ on a coin, whether
Right.
his image was too holy.
Is that the
And certainly
iconoclasm
iconoclasm.
controversy?
That's right.
Hmm.
From about 723, I think they actually start to take off the images of
Right.
Jesus and smash up any art where it appears on walls and buildings and things like that, because suddenly they're afraid there've been a series of earthquakes, and they're afraid that those earthquakes might be God showing His displeasure at them actually
Right.
depicting something so holy.
And was there
Excuse me.
was there
So
some Islamic influence in that too, as Islam spread, because of how central to Islam it is to not depict the divine? I've always wondered about. I don't know if that was just a coincidence or.
I think you could be right. I mean, certainly this is obviously in the Byzantine world. So that
Right.
this is very much a Christian. The iconoclasm was
Right.
very much a Christian reaction. Of course, Islam has its own rules against not
Right.
depicting anything that is
But
divine
that
as
hadn't
well.
really
So
influenced, obviously, the empire
no,
internally
well,
too much. Okay.
I think this is it may well have had influence. I mean,
Yeah.
it's certainly something that they became very concerned about, and it's not. It takes over it's over a century before Christ. They make the decision then that Christ can be depicted
Hmm.
on coins and art, and then the image slowly starts to sort of creep back. But it is yeah. I mean, it is very interesting. I mean, the other thing is, of course, is that obviously Edessa became Muslim occupied, and so you have this interesting sort of dynamic where um, Justinian II actually
Hmm.
reigned two different reigns, and in his first reign he depicts Christ on his coins as having the beard. In his second reign, incidentally, he doesn't. He actually
Hmm.
presents Christ as being sort of curly haired and much younger looking, and with a very neat beard, but very sort of much cleaner
Yes.
shaven. And the suggestion there, and I sort of looked at why that might have been.
Hmm.
And one of the things which is quite interesting is that Justinian was basically deposed, and his the people that became emperor after him went to war.
Hmm.
With the Muslim neighbors, and so when Justinian II resumed, took the throne back, he was actually at war with his Muslim neighbors. That may be why he
Hmm.
wasn't able to get down there and to depict the image from from the Edessa cloth on his coats. I don't know. I
Okay.
mean, that's hypothetical, but
Sure.
it is interesting, you know. But so yes, so you're absolutely right. So this image of Christ had gone on before,
Right.
um,
And then it
and
eventually is
certainly
brought to
yeah,
Constantinople from
it
Edessa.
was always on the more expensive, obviously on the gold coins and things like that.
Right.
It
Right.
wasn't until John Zemiscis that we actually see the face of Christ appearing on the circulating, the mass produced, the bronze coins,
Sure.
which would obviously had a much wider circulation. And the other thing as well, just to bear in mind to anybody who's actually having a look at the image. We have to remember, of course, that what the engraver engraved and what we actually see on the coin is actually reversed, because the
Mm.
engraver would have actually engraved directly onto the die. And the
Right.
way
I
that
wanted
they
to
would
ask you.
do it
Yeah.
is that, yeah, so the engraver, and bearing in mind he's working for this image of the face, he's working at not much more than a centimeter. I mean, that's literally the size that he's working with. So incredible precision
That
and
eye
accuracy.
strain. I'm just imagining the
Absolutely
detail.
extraordinary.
Wow.
And I think you only see it really because obviously when you blow the image up and you see the image in all its detail, but
Yeah.
when you actually see the coin, it's such a tiny coin. But what you have to remember, of course, is that he would have engraved that onto a die. The metal discs then would have obviously been slightly melted and put between two dies, and then struck very hard with a hammer
Mm.
to actually produce the image. So what we actually see, what we actually get, is something that technically we need to flip it in order to,
Right.
or reverse the image in order to see what the engraver actually engraved.
Right.
And when we do that, suddenly, as I said, when you hold that up then to the image of the shroud, and you can see, and I think the thing that the first engraver in 969 did, which I think he did us a great favor, whereas most engravers would try to create, if you like, an image of a bearded man, they would go to town making it very human-like and things like that. The first engraver of this particular coin, I think, he didn't take that approach. I think what he did was try to copy the lines that actually make up the image
Hmm.
as best he can. And I think when you actually overlay, I did a little work where I overlaid my image with the face on the shroud, and you put them across, and suddenly you can see all of these points of detail that marry up. I think he did a
Sure.
phenomenal job with as you say, with that must have had incredible eye strain to have actually been able to have created something so small that married up so much with the facial detail on the shroud.
Right.
And I think that, and again, I think what that helps to do is, if you accept the fact that the Byzantine coin engraver must have seen the shroud, then it means that the Shroud of Turin that we know as we know it today was the Mandylion of Edessa,
Hmm.
and suddenly you have a 2,000 year. unbroken line.
Right.
Going right the way back through Edessa,
Wow.
through the legend and through the story, right back to the first century and the disciples bringing it to King Akbar. So suddenly
Yeah.
you have this, the shroud suddenly becomes, a 2,000-year-old sort of object, which is, I think, what it is, and I think anything that helps
Right.
to support that and to show that, I think, is great.
Well, and then, like I said too, or well, like you said earlier, and we've been putting up occasionally in the edited version of this, of course, the overlay, so you can get a good high definition view of this. And I'm just looking at it
Yeah,
in here too, and it's just, again, it's just when you see it, it's like you can't unsee it. And it's not like some Rorschach blot, or something where it's just a
no, no,
blob, and it's like, oh, I'm seeing what I want to see. I mean, it's compare these two faces, and very
yeah,
important details that why weave the hair like that. This isn't by mistake. This
exactly.
guy is very
Yeah,
meticulously making it look like this. Why? You know,
yeah.
and
And I think,
yeah,
I don't, I'm not saying that all of the, I mean, don't forget, in order to produce all of these bronze follies, they must have had an army of coin engravers making these coins, because the
sure,
dies would wear out very quickly. And of
right,
course, if you're mass producing the coins of the empire,
right.
you're going to have to be churning them out very, very quickly.
And you don't have any
So
machinery to do that. It's
you
it's
have
not
no machinery to
automated or
do it.
anything, of course. And
Not at all. Not at
right.
all. So I think they would have, made a template, and they would have
Hmm.
all copied that. So when we're looking at, so I'm not suggesting that every bronze follis looked like this.
Hmm.
The difficulty that we have is that is finding examples where there's enough detail to be able to
Right.
still make that determination. But certainly it's there. There's no doubt about it. And I
Well,
think
and
if
if
you
if
look at
one
them
if one engraver got to see this cloth and did that, and it's true,
precisely,
it proves that it was there. That's
precisely.
the
So
doesn't
I
need to,
think it's
right.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Well, and this lines up too with so many of the different theories about because if you get permission, which I increasingly hope I someday get to actually go see the shroud when it is displayed, and you have it now, of course, in its stretched out mode and in the way that most
Mhm.
people think of it. Um, it's easy to sort of overlook the possibility that it was indeed, if it was the Mandylion, as we see in records, wasn't stored that way always. That
No, not at all.
if you
Yeah.
take that cloth and you fold it up, and there's lots of videos about this online. People can check about the folds and everything, which
Yes,
are really intriguing to show how
absolutely.
you could, just following the folds that are on the cloth, you could easily imagine it being folded in such a way that it could be put into a frame that then just displays the face for public
The face.
veneration and this kind of thing. And
And there
could
was
you
a
could
very,
you talk
very good
about that a little
reason,
bit
I
too?
think.
The halo
Yeah,
thing was
yeah.
interesting.
Yes, well, I think that is always quite fascinating, because
Yeah,
certainly when you actually see the coins, particularly, you do have this circle
yeah,
around their heads, and that, I think, might have been, and again it's only, but certainly when we look at images of the Mandylion, as you said, it's displayed in a wide rectangular frame, which coincidentally is exactly what you would end up with if you folded the cloth in such a way as to only display the face, with a circle cut out of it in order to reveal the face underneath it. And that seems to be how the shroud was presented, how the Mandylion was presented. So yeah, so that there is that suggestion that perhaps this is where the depiction of the halo has come from. With the coin designers actually incorporating the circle that on the Mandylion, sort of around the holy face, in their designs. So again, it's just a speculation. It's not, but I think it's definitely worthy of further
yes,
investigation, because it's certainly, I mean, it's an interesting phenomena, why artists suddenly began to depict certainly
sure,
Christ, and then later on other saints with a sort of like a ring around them. I mean, we don't get anything specifically in the Bible to sort of suggest exactly what they're looking
right,
at there.
sure,
But that might well be how the first coin designers actually chose to depict him, because they would have looked down and they would have seen this circle around the face, obviously as part of the frame of the the Mandylion. I mean, we also know one of the reasons why, of course, grave cloths would have been considered unclean. And
Right.
so I think there may well have been an attempt to disguise the fact that this was a grave cloth by hiding the rest of the body, which is obviously heavily bloodstained and
Right.
with all of the injuries sort of crucifixion on them,
Sure.
and just depicting the face itself. That again might be another reason why the Mandylion is often referred to as being a face only, is
Hmm.
because of how it was stored. But certainly, as you said, there has to be a reason for that incredibly long, wide frame, and
Right.
certainly would suggest that it was hiding something a lot bigger. And we also do get these wonderful descriptions. There's a wonderful description in. I'm going to read it to you so I can get it
Sure.
correct.
Please.
In a sermon that was attributed to Pope Stephen II in 755 AD, so this is before the shroud comes to Constantinople.
Hmm.
Pope Stephen says that Christ, quote, spread out his entire body on a linen cloth that was white as snow, the glorious image of the Lord's face, and the length of his entire and most noble body has been divinely transferred. So that again is
Which there's
saying that this
nothing
is
in
not
scripture
just a
about that.
nothing at all. This is suggesting that there is a full body image
Wow.
on this linen cloth, which again is certainly telling. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's I think it's a fascinating field of study. It's one that
Oh,
has
absolutely.
consumed me and made me. I think that given me my fascination of history, which obviously I've carried with me to this
Sure.
day. So it's great, absolutely great.
Well, I'll tell you what, just Justin, this has been such a delight. I just, maybe ask you kind of in closing here if there's anything
Sure.
else you want to share or anything you have coming up or what you like. Do you have any aspirations for your next or kind of ongoing shroud investigation? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, I was absolutely thrilled earlier this year. David Rolfe's new documentary, which
Yes,
I would encourage everybody to
absolutely.
see. It's absolutely superb, and David very generously included my 969 anonymous follis actually as his as the new evidence that has
Hmm.
recently come to light to help to establish this connection between the Mandylion and what we know today as the Shroud of Turin. I think that was great. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was as happy as anything. And as I said, as a small boy, I actually remember watching The Silent Witness with my mother as a small boy, and to see David's new documentary and to see a little bit of my research sort of finding its way into that
Sure.
was absolutely wonderful. So that was a great thrill. And so yeah, I mean, I'm enormously excited and thrilled to be able to play a very small part in obviously all of the evidence which has been found to authenticate the shroud. One of the things that I like is that this is something that it's a very visual thing,
Yes.
um, and the great thing about working with coins is, as I said, is that we know who struck them, we know where they were struck, we know when they were struck, and that helps us to ground this as a moment in time. And I think that I would invite your viewers certainly to go and decide for themselves. You know how
Mhm.
much of it the evidence I think is there, and I think that this is a small cog in a gigantic sort of field of evidence. But it all helps to add up to I believe an unmistakable conclusion that the Shroud of Turin is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. I've, I don't need, I'm a person of faith. I don't need the Shroud of Turin to be real in order to validate my own faith,
Right.
but I think it is, and unmistakably so. And I know Russ Perot once described it as a receipt, which I love,
Yes.
to actually to show that this divine exchange has taken place. And I like that. I think that's a tremendous way of looking at the shroud, and I think it has enormous consequences. I think it speaks to people to this day, and I think it has enormous, profound consequences for the future of humanity. And so I'm very excited to be a part of that.
Oh, hey, likewise. So, well, thank you so much, Justin, for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. We'll have to keep in
No, it's
touch
been
and
my pleasure.
see how things
Absolutely.
keep going. So,
Yes, thank you very much, Ray.
absolutely. Well, God bless. Take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye bye.
Kind of makes you want to start a coin collection, doesn't it? It's a really interesting sort of hobby a lot of people are interested in. And I personally, as someone who loves history and of course, someone who is deeply in love with our Lord and always wanting to go deeper into my relationship with Him and follow wherever the evidence leads, this was just a really, really interesting and intriguing kind of conversation to have. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm sure you did. Like I said at the beginning, please share this far and wide with anyone you think might benefit from it. And if you're tuning in here too, just because you are interested in coins and not necessarily the shroud, or at least at first, I want to welcome you again, encourage you to subscribe and share this as far and wide as you possibly can. God bless all of you. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.